Then this offensive starts, and I guess it was December is when it started, right? Is that when the offensive started? Late November, yeah, late November. This breakout happened out of Idlib, and it started, you know, overwhelming the Syrian army's positions because the Syrian army was just like underpaid, tired of like a lot of the soldiers hadn't been paid in a long time. The officers had had their like pay reduced, and everyone is just about sick of Assad. A lot of this has to do with the ongoing sanctions for like the past decade. And, there's just not a lot of future under the Assad regime, so soldiers weren't willing to die for what was an obviously well organized, well armed, and incredibly
and well
vicious,
funded.
well funded
Yeah.
insurgency. And the way that you could tell this was well funded and well armed is they've got like armored vehicles, they've got Turkish weaponry, Turkish drones. They're all kitted out using NATO weapons. They had Ukrainian drone operators that had volunteered because this is supposed to be like a thumb in the eye for Putin as well. So I think there was like 150 drone operators, or a drone operation team of 150 that was helping HTS in this offensive, and their tactics were incredibly sophisticated. And it's said that there's likely Turkish special forces that were helping, uh, uh, like commanding. Well, first of all, training previously, and then commanding these assaults. And it was clearly either a rogue Turkish or NATO operation, and I think it was a NATO operation that Turkey took control of,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, and then Israel invades at the same time to create a buffer zone, and Al Jalani says we're not a threat to Israel, and we're not a threat to the West. We took out this bad guy that you hated, and now Israel, you can go bomb Iran whenever you want without these incredibly sophisticated air defense systems that the Russians left behind for Assad to shoot down your planes.
Yeah.
Um,
Which then the Israelis just decided to bomb just to be extra sure.
yeah. So anyway, that's the background. Now that HTS is nominally in control, with glowing press from the West, he went on which channel did he go on? It was like NBC. Some channel brought him on and interviewed him. He wore a suit. He changed out of his Islamic militant garb and put on a suit and did an interview where he talked about how much he loved the West now, and how much I don't remember what channel it was, but it was clearly set up in advance as part of this operation. And he declared himself president after taking control, and has now been ruling as the dictator of Syria. And there have been a lot of isolated incidents of sectarian violence that have been reported on social media, but there's a total media blackout for anything bad happening in Syria. Even though, the Turks are bombing the Kurds, the Israelis are stealing Syrian territory, and HTS is doing pogroms against Alawites and Christians and Druze. So finally, things have gotten so bad that the Western media is starting to take notice.
Which means that they've gotten really bad.
Yes, it means that it's gotten really bad. So what happened is a group of Alawites were defending themselves against pogroms by HTS. They've been like going around and killing families and raping women and executing, entire men, women, and children, Alawite men, women, and children. And finally, a group of Alawites, banded together to defend themselves, and they ambushed an HTS, band of like these marauders that were going around and pillaging and raping and whatever, and they killed all of them. So now HTS is making a concerted effort to wipe out the Alawites, and there's been 1,000 killed and at least 700 of them civilians so far in one article that I read, but there are probably a lot more that are going on that haven't been reported. And as you would expect, the liberals in the West are saying, oh, yeah, but those are like Assadists. What fucking Assadists? Assad is gone. It's over. Assad is over. These are just Alawites protecting themselves.
Well, but Assad is like an image. It's just like stands above reality. It's like a Stalinist.
Yeah.
You're a Stalinist even if it's 1970. And they're Stalin's not a factor at all.
But essentially, Assadists are just people who don't want to get killed by, militants, by Sunni militants. But, right, so that happened, and now there's like an offensive against Alawites going on. And when I say offensive, I mean like, essentially ethnic cleansing is happening. And that's exactly what everyone who wasn't like part of the mainstream liberal press said was going to happen. And when I say
the fear of that happening is a big part of the reason why Assad was in power for so long.
Right. It's why people supported Assad, even though they didn't actually like him.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got Jewish friends and Christian friends from Syria who supported Assad, and they would otherwise be considered incredibly liberal people. And I would be like, look, the entire liberal establishment and every last liberal in the United States hates Assad. Why do you like Assad? Like, I don't like Assad. I just know that he's the only thing keeping, the Salafists from like murdering my whole family. So,
yeah, to me, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, I mean, like, obviously, I wish that there was a proletarian revolution in Syria and the Council Republic was being formed and the workers are taking control of the means of production, but that's just not happening. And instead of that, we've got sectarian violence and, pogroms.
Yeah. That's the thing about like the third camp. Sometimes it just is not present.
Right. Well, I mean, like, that's when I say all the libs have been saying, oh, well, those were Salafists, not Salafists, those were Assadists. And this is just, the people of Syria defending themselves against Assadists. A lot of those people, I've seen that sentiment coming from former ISO people as well. Yeah. And they were former ISO people were the ones posting about how denying Syrian agency, it was denying Syrian agency to say that this was like a NATO or a Turkish or Israeli backed operation, even though like they're riding around in Turkish armored personnel carriers with Turkish weapons and Turkish fatigues on with Turkish special forces helping them and Ukrainian drone operators. And
the Turkish government, like they talk about it.
Yeah.
They talk about their friendly
openly
forces.
Taking credit for it.
Yeah, it's like it's not a secret.
Yeah, so like
it's not a theory. It's not
no, not at all.
Yeah, this is just what's happening, and it's very obvious.
Like, the third camp has never met a NATO intervention that they didn't like, so they've got to stick to their guns on this, even though it means supporting ethnic violence. But so essentially, there's the thing that's going on right now is there's like the media blackout, like what happened after Gaddafi died in Libya, where everyone on all the third campus celebrated and all the liberals were super happy. And then as soon as the sectarian violence started and the slave markets opened up, no one wanted to talk about it anymore. And that's what's happening in Syria, except for that there have been a couple articles in Reuters about how, Alawites are being massacred. So that's what's going on in Syria right now. Funnily enough, the place that the Christians and Alawites are running to for protection is Russian air bases. And that can help segue us into Europe. And the Radio War Nerd just did a pretty good free episode on this. So if people want to go to their Patreon and check it out, it's really good. And they go into a lot more detail than I did. But yeah, so let's go over to Europe before we talk about um, actually what happened in Ukraine, because Europe right now is okay.
In
Back up.
chaos.
Right. So last time we talked, Zelensky had like an hour or two before we recorded been booted out of the White House for lecturing JD Vance and Trump about uh, you know the need to support Ukraine forever, and how negotiating with Putin was a dead end, and how we're going to feel the pressure even with our big ocean because of the negotiating with Putin or whatever he said. But it turns out that there's like an hour worth of that video, and if you go back and watch it, which I didn't do, but I've like watched and read several people's commentary on it, and they've showed clips and everything. But if you go back and you watch it, uh, Zelensky's picking a fight the entire time.
Yeah.
He's pushing the envelope the entire time, trying to talk about security guarantees, trying to talk about how it's not we shouldn't be negotiating with Putin, stuff like that. So what everyone sees is just the blow up, and poor little Zelensky getting picked on by Trump. So I don't feel bad for Zelensky. I don't understand people that feel bad for the guy that sold his country out to BlackRock and NATO, and has become a very rich man somehow through all of this. I don't feel he made a bed, put a bunch of fucking snakes in it, and then laid down in it, and all of a sudden the snakes are biting them, and he's like, "Oh my god, the snakes are biting me! Please help!"
Well, it's more like that. The snakes are just. I don't really know how to
leaving
use this metaphor.
They're leaving. And he's like, wait, I need those snakes here.
Yeah, the mistreatment that he's suffering is that the U.S. is like, we not going to do as much now. That's it.
Well, okay, so that was what I was getting to next. So after the puppet dictator of Ukraine left the White House, having been chastised by the new head of the tottering global hegemon, after he left chastised, he goes to Europe. He meets with Starmer. He meets with the King of England. He meets with Macron, and all of the heads of Europe get together and they say, "Well, we're going to take up the slack for the United States. We're going to rebuild the European militaries, and we're going to keep funding Ukraine," and all this nonsense. And then they have some emergency meetings. I think that they end up having 3 of them, and both the French and the British are putting forward competing plans of what to do, and the Poles are not interested, and neither are the Germans. So essentially,
that makes a lot of sense. Of course, the Poles are. They're not actually going to. They're not talking about like deploying troops in Ukraine,
right?
Because it's like on their border.
The
British can talk about it because it's like a million miles away. It's like it's empty rhetoric for Starmer.
Right. It's empty rhetoric for Starmer. It's empty rhetoric for Macron. Macron's not going to be around long enough to be able to deploy troops in Ukraine. I think that he's just trying to parlay this into some sort of position in European government. He's trying to look like the strong leader that will stand up to Putin or whatever. He's the one that said, "I'll extend France's nuclear umbrella to the rest of Europe, and France will become the new arsenal of democracy."
Of
course,
it won't though.
It won't. No, and the Germans are against it. The Germans oppose that. Germany's like, well, we've got the biggest industrial base in Europe, even though it's like largely deindustrialized itself over the past decade. And it's like, and we have the biggest capacity for creating arms. Germany is going to be the new arms supplier for Europe, and France is like, no, we're going to be the new arms supplier for Europe. And then they want to take a lead role in this. Basically, you've got the three biggest players in Europe trying to jockey to be the new rulers, the leaders of the free world. Right now that America's not in the
new America, to be US
the new
part
America.
2.
Right. So all of this, let's say this happens. Oh, and you've got like Europe, the EU Parliament, and talking about how it wants to create a European army and spend, close to $1 trillion outfitting that army or whatever, and talking about how this is something that needs to happen. We can't rely on the United States and NATO anymore, and so we're going to have to cut social welfare programs in order to do this.
Hmm.
And Germany is all in. They just elected a government that promised not to break the debt ceiling. And
Well, right, and like if anybody opposes it, like in Romania, their elections just don't count.
Yeah. So in Romania, Calin Georgescu, who is what they call him a far right politician. I think that's just because he's critical of NATO and doesn't support the war in Ukraine. But
Well, and also because the far left is just not to be found most of the time.
Right. And European far rightists to me look like average Republicans in the United States.
Yeah.
Like
I mean, mostly there are some, like there are people in the Front National or the Rassemblement National who are directly related to SS volunteers. And
but
there are people in the Alternative for Deutschland who have a similar, very shady background. But their politics are essentially the same as, they're much more mainstream in the U.S.
Like I call AFD and Rassemblement National post-fascist, because I would call the National Front post-fascist, and I would call Rassemblement National post-fascist.
Yeah, Jean-Marie Le Pen was post-fascist,
and AFD is essentially sort of a neoliberal party that supports German constitutionalism and German democracy, and also supports not feeling bad about World War II anymore. So that makes them a Nazi party, which Germany should feel bad about World War II for fucking ever, obviously.
Yeah,
but
of course.
It's not a political position,